Hi, this is Danielle Urbantrout, and I'm here to talk to you today about the interactionist perspective of SLA, or Second Language Acquisition. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is what is SLA. So SLA is developing knowledge and use of language by either a children or adult who already knows at least one language. The first language is referred to as L1, and any additional languages are referred to as L2. Now, often these theories are based off of first language acquisition theories, and that's including the Interactionist theory, which I will be discussing. And a side note that as far as research go, this is a fairly new field of study, and many of the articles I read talked about how they wish there was more research. So it is an important field, especially for us teachers who will be working with ELL students. Now, the interactionist perspective for acquiring a first language is what the SLA theory is based off of. Now, the interactionist perspective of first language acquisition is based off of many theories that came prior to it. So prior to the interactionist theory, generally language acquisition was either attributed to nature or nurture. Theorists like Chomsky believed that nature was responsible. He believed that all children had a language acquisitioning device, or LAD, which basically meant that he believed children were just hardwired to understand language. On the other hand, behaviorists believed that language was developed by stimulus, response, and reinforcement. This theory falls more towards nurture. A child says a word, the caretaker gets excited and praises the child, then the child continues to say the word. The interactionist perspective considers both nature and nurture. Michael H. Long held this belief that children have the physical capability to learn language, like Chomsky, but he also believed that caregivers play a very important role in language development. He studied the way that caregivers talk to their children and discovered that they would often expand on the children's language. By doing this, they were both verifying meaning and modeling adult use of language. Caregivers scaffold their toddler's participation in conversations by doing these things until it's not needed anymore, because the toddler around preschool has the language that they need. An example of this would be if a child says, "Ball fall down." Then the parent says, "The ball fell off the table? Oh no, is the ball on the ground now? Did it bounce?" So not only did the parent expand upon the meaning conveyed by the child, but they also restructured the sentence. And then the parent elaborated on the child's own language to model more adult language. So that's how the interactionist perspective for first language learners works. Now, the core principles of interactionist perspective for acquiring a second language include the fact that language learning should be unstructured and focused on interaction. Long believed that conversations between native and non-native speakers were absolutely crucial to language acquisition. And he also believed that the zone of proximal development, which is the space between what learners can do by themselves and what learners can do with help. That's this space right here, if you can see my cursor. So this was a theory by Zygot, and Long believed that it also applied to language, and he believed that the most language acquisition would occur if the conversation that a language learner was having fell in this zone of proximal development. He believed that the language learner should be able to understand the meaning, but should need help to understand the whole conversation. And if the conversation fell right in that zone of proximal development, then the optimal learning would occur. He also said that comprehensible input was needed for SLA. So that means that in order for any conversation to take place, the language learner needs to understand what the conversation is about. They need to have to comprehend what the conversation is about. Another core principle is negotiation of meaning. This fits into the interactionist perspective because this is where the learning takes place. So negotiation of meaning is the use of conversational tactics, including asking questions, confirmation, clarification, and repetition to achieve a communication goal. So this is something that we do naturally when we have a conversation. It's when the participants of a conversation work to understand each other. So an example of this would be if speaker 1 said, "I was exhausted after that test." And then speaker 2 said, "Exhausted?" And speaker 1 said, "I was so tired. Answering all those questions made me tired." Then speaker 2 may say, "I was exhausted also." So through that conversation, speaker 2 is learning from speaker 1. So how it works is that the language learner receives some kind of comprehensible input. So Long believed that conversation was the best input. However, input can be writing, like books. So the language learner participates in a conversation using the language that they already know to convey meaning. The participants of the conversation negotiate the meaning, and then the language learner adjusts their own language to match that of the participants. So here, the language learner is negotiating meaning by asking a question. Exhausted? He doesn't understand what that means. So speaker 1 rephrases what they had said so that speaker 2 understands it, and speaker 2 gains this word, exhausted, that they didn't have before. So they acquire some language because of this conversational exchange. So another example of this would be a student learning English may state, "I no understand question." The meaning of the statement is clear. However, the other participant of the conversation may restrict for clarification. "You don't understand the question?" The language learner may respond, "I don't understand the question." So it's this give and take of how conversations help you acquire language that interactionist perspective is all about. Now, output refers to speech produced by language learners. Long didn't state too much about output. However, after him came a man named Swain who thought that output was extremely important. So Swain says that by speaking, language learners are noticing the gap between what others say and what they are saying. So Swain believes that by speaking out loud is when you actually see that zone of proximal development. It's when you see the difference between what the native speaker is saying versus what you're saying. He also says that language learners notice what they said versus what they said out loud versus what the rule is that they may know, and they're able to test out what they want to say versus how it sounds. So if they speak it out loud, they're going to get a lot more than if they only write it down or don't use it out loud verbally, because hearing it gives them a lot of different clues. So in the interactionist perspective, there's no pressure to reduce speech, and speaking occurs naturally in communication. So for the classroom, this theory stresses the importance of real-life conversation. Interaction is imperative for successful language acquisition, so you need to make sure that students are able to talk with each other. If possible, they should have conversations that are just above what they can understand on their own. It's one of the biggest criticisms about this theory is how do you really gauge that? Interaction should be low stakes, not high pressure, so that students are willing to participate and take risks. And most errors will be corrected naturally through negotiation of meaning. However, some may require corrective instruction. So the activity that I have today is that we're going to break into groups, and then I'll give each group a written dialogue, which is just a conversation in writing, between a language learner and a native speaker. Your group will have a few minutes to look over the conversations to see if you can find any negotiation of meaning in the conversation. After that, we'll come back together and read conversations and share what we found. So conversation 1 is located on this slide, conversation 2, and conversation 3. I'll also have them printed out to give to each group. And then the class question is, how does the interactionist perspective of SLA relate to the interactionist perspective of first language learning? And here are my sources. Thank you. Please let me know if you have any questions.